Good evening. It is time for today's tax talk. I'm your host. I'm attorney Stephen Leahy. Let me tell you, today is Wednesday, August 3rd, the year of our Lord 2022. And I was doing my research this morning, and I get my Google alerts, and I did receive I saw a story from John Stossel, and he was talking about Puerto Rico and tax laws, and I was amazed. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Won't you join us? Uh oh. So, again, as I was talking about, I got the John Stossel story. It's everywhere now. He's got it in many different locations throughout the. When I googled it later, many different publications have the same story: tax freedom in Puerto Rico, and I thought it was something new because I had never heard of it. I'm a tax guy. You think I would have, if this was going on, I should have known about it. So shame on me for not knowing. But this has been going. This tax haven has been going on for quite some time. So let's go to the story right away, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Again, very interesting. So here's the story: Tax Freedom in Puerto Rico by John Stossel. I don't know. It's going to be hard for me not to read the story in John Stossel's voice because I love his videos, and I think he does great work. Let's see if we can blow this up a little bit. I think that's okay. Want to pay no federal income tax? We're right there. They got you, right? I mean, who doesn't want to pay federal income tax? Move to Puerto Rico. Really, if you move to the island, you can legally pay none. There's also no capital gains taxes. You just have to give 4% of your income to Puerto Rico. The tax break was started by a Puerto Rican politician who'd watched years of high taxes fail to improve life on the island. He decided to try something different. Obviously, it's a popular idea when people learn about it. Tens of thousands have applied for the exemption, and applications tripled last year. YouTube star Logan Paul, I don't know who that is, moved his show from California to Puerto Rico to take advantage of a tax deal. Investor Peter Schiff, I've heard of him, says, I did it for the obvious benefit of being able to keep most of what I own. It's too bad that Puerto Rico didn't do this decades ago. They wouldn't be in the economic trouble they are in today. A lot of people are moving down here, says social worker Melissa Del Silva. In my newest video, 2 years ago, she ran a therapy business in Rhode Island. Now she runs it remotely from Puerto Rico. I'm saving 25% of my income. She loves her new life. I wake up and have an ocean in front of me. I go out my back door. The rainforest is off in the distance. It's just a magical place to live. Given that this tax break is so big, it's surprising that most Americans haven't heard about it. I'm raising my hand, John. I didn't hear about it. I'm a tax guy, and I still never heard about it. People just don't really talk about it much. There's this fear that people from the state side are going to come down and take over everything. I think there's some video of AOC voicing that same fear. Given Puerto Rico's history, she says, the fear is justified. The Spaniards came and decided it's going to be their island and decimated all the native people. Then the United States comes down and they decide it's going to be their island. But these new Puerto Ricans aren't exactly conquerors. They're a mix of entrepreneurs, tax haters, crypto millionaires, and ordinary people who just want to keep more of their money. By bringing wealth and skills to Puerto Rico, they create opportunity for Puerto Ricans. One report says that they have created 40,000 new jobs. If you don't pay taxes, aren't you hurting Puerto Rico? I do pay taxes, she says. I provide other things as well. She sells digital art and donates part of her sales to local nonprofits. Billionaire Brock Pierce, who I'm not familiar with, moved to Puerto Rico and now runs helps run the charity Toys for Tots. He also is renovating a hotel that was abandoned after Hurricane Maria. That's expected to create 300 jobs. Others are building hurricane resistant farms, tech companies, and schools. But some people always see such an investment as a problem. Representative uh, Representative Alexandria Ocasio Cortez calls the tax incentive horrifying. Of course, she's a socialist and she thinks there should be high taxes on everybody. It's an example of the continued colonization of the people of Puerto Rico, she complains. We are essentially importing a ruling class. And she's offended because she wants to be the ruling class. She seems to think that if someone makes money, others must lose, as if there was only winners or losers. This is a zero-sum thinking. It's true in politics, but it's not true in most of life. Wherever markets are free, new wealth gets created. Then almost everyone wins. De Silva has an answer to Ocasio Cortez's zero-sum thinking. All ships rise with the tide, she says. Let's all grow with this. Puerto Rico has tried big government, strict regulations, high taxes on business, handouts to favored groups, heavy borrowing, and declaring bankruptcy. Because if you don't recall, Puerto Rico had to get special permission from the government, our government, the Congress, to file bankruptcy. And they did. I bet tax breaks work better. So I heard about this. I read that story and I'm like, well, that seems like a good story to talk. How long has this been going on? And so I did. I found a story from Forbes. As you know, this Robert Wood does a lot of good stories on taxes, and I found this story on taxes. I think this is January 10th of this year. Waves of people are moving to Puerto Rico, including investors, lawyers, hedge funders, and more. Given the astounding tax benefits, many are doing it with good reason. The crypto community may be the biggest wave of all, as the alluring press coverage keeps noting, with zero taxes, golf, and beach houses creating a crypto island paradise. What could go wrong? Compared to the benefits, perhaps very little. But as with anything that looks this good, there are some potential qualifiers and hiccups that some people may be ignoring. Puerto Rico's incredible tax savings deals for new residents who jump through all the requisite hoops are not new. However, it is only relatively recently that the island has virtually exploded with an enormous uptick in moves of an economic boom times. Real estate prices have experienced a virtual stratospheric rise. Part of Puerto Rico's government tax incentive programs requires buying a house, a home, within the first 2 years of a move. And you have to pay for the privilege of getting lower taxes. Just how low? Tax-free interest and dividends earned after you become a resident. No long-term capital gains tax on appreciation after you become a resident. This is why the crypto people are moving there, because that's where they made their money, most of them. Now, of course, that's where they're losing on capital gains. But buying and selling crypto is capital gains. And so if you could make money on crypto and avoid capital gains, you pay zero taxes. No long-term capital gains tax on appreciation after you become a resident. 5% tax on long-term capital gain for appreciation before you move for any sales during your first 10 years as a resident. Among the most glossed over qualifiers to the rules is about Puerto Rico source income. You get the great benefits only on income sourced in Puerto Rico, not on everything else, which the IRS can still tax. Many people might like to ignore established sourcing rules and might imagine that if you live in Puerto Rico, everything is Puerto Rico source income. Another qualifier is and I don't know what that would mean. If I'm, for instance, if I'm an attorney and I give legal advice to people in other states, is that Puerto Rican sourced or is that an other state source? I would think it's other state sources, but I don't know, because and you'll see this because we're going to talk about it. Some of the jobs that they are asking for are legal lawyers. Everything in Puerto Rico sources. Another qualifier is the rule that pre-move depreciation on your assets is still taxed by the IRS. The rules for stocks are quite clear on this point. The rules for crypto are not as clear. So there are some differences of opinion about how crypto will be treated. I have to say the IRS will probably do the pre thing. It's hard to prove, though. If you think the IRS is the biggest loser, you're right. The IRS and the Puerto Rican government are cooperating to identify people who are cutting corners or even outright cheating. There are bound to be scores of audits, even for overworked government agencies. Even some criminal tax cases seem likely. In 2020, a prominent Puerto Rican CPA was indicted and arrested over the alleged scheme to turn U.S. source income into Puerto Rico income. A short time later, his large U.S. accounting firm exited the Puerto Rican market. Despite qualifiers, of course, Puerto Rico's program is incredible. U.S. citizens are taxable on their worldwide income. That unforgiving price tag has caused some Americans to renounce their citizenship, going through an exit process. I did a story about this a couple of weeks ago, and the taxes that they hit you with if you expatriate, the expatriation tax. You can find that. Maybe I should connect it here. But given the long list of benefits of being American and the irrevocability of such a decision, renouncing citizenship is way too drastic for most people. Puerto Rico seems alluring, where you remain American, keep your passport, but you can pay a fraction of the taxes you now pay. Puerto Rico is a U.S. Commonwealth, part of the U.S., but in some ways still independent. Its tax system is a hybrid, part U.S., part not. If you can really move yourself and your business, you may be able to cut your income taxes to the bone. But you have to be careful. As with any move, you have to actually move. Well, again, a lot of people do this here in Illinois. I get a lot of these cases where they move. Actually, people that hire me, they have really moved, and Illinois doesn't want to say that they moved. But when you move, right, you can't just move on paper. You have to actually move. And a lot of people believe, well, if I just am there, half a year plus 1 day, I moved and Illinois can't tax me anymore. But that's just not the truth. But you have to be careful. You have to actually move. Your tax home, your real home, must be in Puerto Rico. Just like any move from one state to another, it has to be real. Try to avoid messy facts that don't look like a permanent move. Ideally, sell your home, move your family, sever connections to your old local clubs, and so on. After all, if you are later ruled not to be Puerto Rico residents, the IRS is back in the picture asking for back taxes, and you don't want that to happen. Penalties and interest. To qualify, an individual must not have been a resident of Puerto Rico within the last 15 years. You must become a resident of Puerto Rico, and you must reside there for at least 183 days a year, or meet one of the several other tests that are less clear-cut. Perhaps the hardest overall test to meet, which comes as a kind of overlay on everything else, is the closer connections test. Where are your connections closest, Puerto Rico or somewhere else? You also have to do the paperwork, filing an application with the tax authority there. Once that's approved, it's a binding contract for the low taxes mentioned above. But among the most misunderstood rules is the web of interactions between federal taxes with the IRS and local taxes in Puerto Rico. What is that? I don't even have McAfee. In many, if not most cases, you must file taxes in two places, with the IRS and with Puerto Rico Department of Finance. So there's still paperwork. You never get around that. Still, Puerto Rico hopes to lure American mainlanders with an income tax of only 4%, legally avoiding 37% federal rate, and the 13.3% California or other state rate is a jaw-dropping benefit. What's more, there is no tax on dividends and no capital gains tax in Puerto Rico. The return to the qualifiers, forget about easily avoiding U.S. tax on the appreciation in your assets before you move. If you move with appreciated stock or other property and then sell, the pre-move appreciation is still subject to U.S. tax. Only your post-move appreciation will be subject to the special tax rules in Puerto Rico. The rules for crypto are still being developed, and some more adventurous taxpayers believe that appreciation in crypto will not be bifurcated like stock. For stock, to escape U.S. tax on all of the pre-move appreciation, you generally must wait a full 10 years after you move. That is hardly a quick fix. What about selling your U.S. real estate? That will always be U.S. source income. Many Americans feel overtaxed, and the Biden administration plans are probably not helping that trend. State income taxes add to the burden, particularly in high tax states, and particularly with the general federal tax rule that you can deduct only $10,000 in state taxes on your federal tax return. Increasingly, when taxpayers are looking at leaving a high tax state for a tax-free state, they might be looking at Puerto Rico too. Again, good article. I found this too. I wanted to just kind of mention it. Where this has some of the rules, the laws that they mentioned. Puerto Rico taxes, how to benefit from incredible tax incentives. There's no doubt that Puerto Rico taxes are incredible incentives to move to the island. To benefit from tax incentives, you have to meet specific requirements, though. Just declaring a U.S. territory your new home is not enough. Let's look at the Puerto Rico tax benefits and how to qualify for them. This is part one of Puerto Rico tax series. Read part two here. We're not going to do part two. First of all, thanks to Section 936, Puerto Rico sourced income is excluded from U.S. taxation. Puerto Rico residents only pay PR taxes on their income sourced on the island. In addition to attract investment, Puerto Rico enacted two tax acts, Act 20 and Act 22. Those two tax acts offer low to no taxes on certain types of income. Act 20, Export Services Act, 4% corporate tax rate for Puerto Rico services companies. So servicing companies, services companies. Act 22, Individual Investors Act, 0% capital gain tax for Puerto Rican residents. More recently, these two acts have been updated and combined in a new law called Act 60. However, the rates for corporate taxes and capital gains tax remain the same. Act 60 could be perfect for high net worth entrepreneurs with service businesses and for traders with high capital gains, including crypto gains. Puerto Rico Act 60, 4% corporate tax for eligible businesses. The incredibly low 4% corporate tax rate stipulated by Act 60 applies only to businesses that perform eligible services on the island to customers and clients outside the island. That means the service has to be exported to non-PR individuals or foreign companies that have no nexus with Puerto Rico. The service cannot be related to a trade, business, or other activity on the island. I didn't know that. To benefit, and I read this article, to benefit from the low 4% corporate tax rate, the business must meet certain requirements. The key is that the business has to provide a service. That means that manufacturing or other non-service businesses don't qualify. Eligible services include but are not limited to. So then there's a bunch of these that they listed. Professional, and I'm just going to point this out because I'm an attorney. Professional services such as legal, and I'm a tax attorney, tax and accounting services. Interesting. Graphic design, educational training services, data processing, call centers, all that. Other requirements to qualify for 4% corporate tax rate in Puerto Rico. Besides having an eligible business, you must meet other key requirements. Be a Puerto Rican resident. The low tax rate only applies to Puerto Rico sourced income, so you have to actually live in Puerto Rico. If you run the business partially from the U.S., then you could be engaged in a U.S. trade or business for U.S. tax purposes. This would trigger U.S. income taxes. Have a local Puerto Rico employee. Years ago, the company needed to have a minimum number of 5 employees, which then changed to 1 employee. But now, only companies with $3 million or more in revenue must have 1 employee. The employee must have full Social Security benefits and pay taxes in Puerto Rico. How the 2017 U.S. tax reform impacted PR companies. Prior to the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, you could have a Puerto Rico company but not be a resident there. You would have paid 4% tax in Puerto Rico and defer U.S. tax on retained earnings. Unfortunately, this does not work anymore. The new tax law eliminated tax deferral on foreign retained earnings. This means that if you are not a Puerto Rican resident, you would pay the U.S. tax on the business income. So for non-PR residents, there is no tax incentive for having a Puerto Rico company. Puerto Rico Act, 0% capital gains. Tax-free capital gains are a big draw for investors and traders. However, this part of Puerto Rico Act 60 applies only to Puerto Rico-sourced capital gains and passive income. To qualify, you must be a bona fide resident of Puerto Rico for an entire tax year. Furthermore, you must make a mandatory annual donation of $10,000 and buy a home in Puerto Rico. To be a bona fide resident, you meet the presence test. Do not have a tax home outside Puerto Rico. Do not have a closer connection to the United States or to a foreign country than to Puerto Rico. Being physically present in Puerto Rico for at least 183 days during the tax year qualifies you as a Puerto Rico resident. Presence means you had your feet on the ground at any point during the day. However, there are some leeway. IRS Code Section 937 provides additional guidance for bona fide resident status. Specifically, you cannot have a tax home outside of Puerto Rico during the tax year, and you cannot have a closer connection to the U.S. or a foreign country. This means that you could spend less than 183 days in Puerto Rico as long as you don't spend more time in the U.S. or any other country than you spend in Puerto Rico. Be aware that you then still must meet one of the following requirements. I'm not going to go through all those requirements. Puerto Rico taxes are qualified capital gains and dividend or on interest income. The 0% rate only applies to income realized or accrued as a Puerto Rico resident. Any capital gain or passive income accrued prior to becoming a resident is taxed in Puerto Rico at a prevailing tax rate if the gain is recognized within 10 years of becoming a resident. After 10 years, it's taxed at 5%. So let's just do the last one. As you see, Puerto Rico tax incentives come with specific requirements and limitations. Well, of course they do. They are not a quick tax saving scheme. No, they're a long-term tax savings scheme. Still, for people who want to live on the island, Puerto Rico taxes offer an incredible deal. The next post in our Puerto Rico series will discuss who will benefit most from moving to Puerto Rico and alternative options to pay to tax optimize your business. If you are considering Puerto Rico as a tax saving strategy, book a call with our structuring expert. Excuse me. Okay, so I'm not going to go do the commercial. Okay, so that's very interesting, I think. I did not know such a thing was possible. Pay 0 or 4% taxes. Wow. You have to buy a home. Well, if I'm saving money on my taxes, I have the money to buy a home. I understand that the property in Puerto Rico has gone very high. I was looking in San Juan, and to live on the water there, very expensive. To live off the water, not so much. So anyway, I thought it was interesting. Maybe you might be interested in this about moving. We all want to save taxes. Many people, I live in Illinois. Many people are moving out of Illinois, finding tax havens outside of Illinois, going to Tennessee, going to Florida, going to Texas, where they don't have income taxes, state income taxes, but you're still stuck with the federal income tax. But if you go to Puerto Rico, apparently you can avoid that too. Pretty interesting. Something to think about. It's taxes. It's Puerto Rico. Actually, could have put this in my Crypto Tuesday because it's a lot to do with crypto millionaires and saving them, or maybe they're former millionaires now. I don't know. So anyway, thanks so much for joining us. Remember, ask you to like and share our content. We need you to like and share our content so we can get it out to people. Remember that tax news is really the heart of all news. How do they get the money and how are they going to spend it? And so we hear that tax news here first. So like and share, please. And remember, if you owe the IRS money, if you haven't filed your tax returns in some years, the first thing you should do, and because what happens is people get paralyzed, they don't know what to do. So the first thing you should do, get a copy of my book, Deal with Your IRS Problem Today. Go to freeirsbook.com, freeirsbook.com. Get your free copy of Deal with Your IRS Problem Today. So thanks so much for joining us here today. I appreciate you taking the time. We'll be back tomorrow, and I hope you're here with us. So we'll see you then. Out.